The cope is hitting levels we never thought possible, but the sludge keeps flowing unmitigated by the collective delusion of an industry that is just wrought with bad actors spinning stories with nothing to show for it. Avowed success has rightfully been put into question, based on the raw numbers presented, and we've reached the point similar to how Dragon Age Veilguard went, where these industry types are now attempting to run gaslighting campaigns to convince players otherwise. Here's Screen Rant's article, Avowed Success Could Be the Death of Bethesda. Already from the get-go, this derails itself, where the journalist here named Tom Wilson begins. Obsidian Entertainment has often felt like it is in the shadow of Bethesda, with its better-known games including The Outer Worlds and Avowed often being directly compared to Bethesda's beloved IP. The Outer Worlds is seen as just being Fallout Light, and Avowed, up until launch, was Skyrim Light. Obsidian Entertainment has even made a spin-off of Bethesda's Fallout series in the form of New Vegas, further implying, at least at first glance, that the developer is riding the coattails of a bigger and more successful one. Let me stop you right there, Tom. Obsidian is absolutely in the business of making Bethesda-like light games. It goes without question. I would frankly consider most of their successful games are either reimaginings of what other developers have made, or games that are sequels to things that other devs have already done. For an example, New Vegas is the obvious one here. Of course, Obsidian was founded with some of the founders being people who worked on the original Fallout games. One of these founders, whose name I will mess up, is Fergus Urgahart? I don't know. But he's one of the 5 founders of Obsidian who worked on Fallout 2. While the Fallout games are beloved, that goes without question, the reality is that the series did not hit the mainstream in the same way it has until Bethesda made Fallout 3, which understandably that blew the doors off everything and made that series into a household name. That now everyone from, say, Call of Duty players and more, they all know what Fallout is because of what Bethesda did with it. This isn't to deny the importance of Fallout pre-Bethesda, but credit needs to be taken that it was Bethesda that blew that franchise up to now having a hit TV show and multiple games post this. Another example of a game that Obsidian made was Knights of the Old Republic 2. Of course, the first KOTOR was developed by BioWare, but due to its scheduling conflicts, BioWare was unable to develop the sequel. But BioWare was good friends with Obsidian as developers and then pushed LucasArts to actually allow Obsidian to develop the sequel instead. Understandably, a lot of these legacy RPG studios, BioWare, Bethesda, Obsidian, and more, they all have developers and people who either know each other or have worked together in the past on other games. To say that the early 2000s was a golden era of Western RPGs, I think we can agree that would be a massive understatement. Apart from the KOTOR games, like I said, you had the Fallout re-emerging with Fallout 3 that won tons of awards, and of course stuff like Oblivion came out during the early 2000s as well. Not to mention you had stuff like Mass Effect and more. This golden era, in my opinion, it has been over for quite a while. I would wager that the golden era of Western RPGs ended promptly in 2015 when Witcher 3 released. That was probably the last big Western RPG that released, and rightfully so blew the doors off the hinges too of expectations and what gamers could get from games. Fun fact actually, when CD Projekt Red was making the first Witcher, it was actually BioWare that saved them and gave them the resources and even the space, like physically, on their convention floor within BioWare's booth to promote their little game that was called The Witcher that no one at the time knew about. And BioWare helped CD Projekt effectively turn themselves into another big RPG maker. I know some would say, but what about Cyberpunk 2077? Isn't that too a golden era game? Well, it would have been if the game released in a playable state and was more in line with what it is now when it did release initially in 2020. But it can't be understated how poorly received Cyberpunk was at launch due to technical issues and more, as we all know. This is why, in my opinion, the last actual great release from the West RPG-wise is The Witcher 3, and that still hasn't been beaten. Like I said, the golden era of Western RPGs is kind of not really a thing now. Sure, some may say, but what about Kingdom Come 2? But having put well over 60 hours into that game myself, so far I think that Kingdom Come 2 is maybe a 6 or a 7 out of 10 at best. I honestly just find it to be very outdated in a lot of ways myself. And if you were to ask me, I would actually say that The Witcher 3, that looks far better than Kingdom Come 2 does, despite being 10 years older than it as well. especially if you compare the enhanced version of Witcher 3 available now on modern platforms. Kingdom Come 2, just graphically and performance-wise and all of that, it cannot even compare in my opinion. So I still stand by my point that the golden era of Western RPGs was from 2000 pretty much to about 2015. Since then, it has been very hit or miss. Obsidian hasn't been doing themselves any favors either, as they clearly just keep rehashing old ideas in somewhat new ways to varying degrees. Like this Tom Wilson of Screen Rant tried to say that things like The Outer Worlds are amazing, frankly, having beaten that game when it first released, I found The Outer Worlds to just be a Fallout-like game with a disappointing story, forgettable characters, and by the numbers, seen this all before gameplay if I'm being honest. The only big positive that I found with Outer Worlds at launch, I guess, was that it wasn't an unmitigated buggy mess of epic proportions that was something that, players kind of expected from these Western RPGs. Beyond the playable state of it, I think Outer Worlds is just average at best, and Fallout, in my opinion, is still much better in every single way. And with Avowed, despite Obsidian trying to steer the conversation away from saying that it's not Skyrim or Oblivion, that doesn't really matter. Because the creators of these games can try to define what their games are, but ultimately, it'll be the community and customers who will decide that for themselves. And looking at them side by side, yeah, Avowed is pretty much Skyrim, just not as good. Besides the fact that it has the unreactive world and bland story and characters, Avowed does play a lot like Skyrim. And it doesn't help that Screen Rant's or Obsidian's case that yet again, like always, Obsidian is just always chasing those glory days they had back in the early 2000s, and look, I don't blame them. I mean, why wouldn't you want to recapture the magic or interest of your better games? It makes sense to me. Of course, every developer will have to play to their strengths, and the DNA of a studio's legacy will always have a place no matter what game they make. From Software, no matter what they do, you can tell that they made the game when you play it. Whether it's Demon's Souls or Bloodborne or Elden Ring, all different games in ways, sure, but they have the same DNA, the same Obsidian has with their games too. I think more so that From Software is a great example of how to take what you're known for and then elevate it and reiterate on what you've done before versus a new release. Elden Ring is pretty much just Dark Souls, but now it's open world, but it's more than that, of course. For an example, you can now jump at your own leisure. Maybe that might not seem big to some, but in the design structure of FromSoft's previous games, jumping freely in, say, Elden Ring or even Sekiro, that's a big thing. Sure, you could jump in the other games, although you would have to, sprint and then tap to launch yourself. Beyond the whole jumping Elden Ring thing, of course, that makes the game far less linear than before and adds open world exploration and tons of secrets and more in that game over something like Dark Souls. Elden Ring is effectively the ultimate FromSoft game in terms of design. It's not my favorite game that they've made, but credit where it's due. And of course, Obsidian with Avowed is just taking the things they know and applying it in a form they are comfortable and understand as well. And again, I have no problem with that, but this article claiming that Obsidian is the Bethesda killer, that's nonsense. It's like, how many times have we heard that this new game is the bona fide Skyrim killer or Call of Duty killer? And then a few months later, Skyrim and COD are still going strong, and then those games that were like, trust me bro, are already dead and gone instead. Too many times, right, that we can all care to agree. It's just incredible to me that when you really think about it, Skyrim truly was the pinnacle of what the Western gaming sphere was capable of making. You can place any RPG against Skyrim, and the likelihood is that in terms of choice, replayability, and content, that Skyrim will still come out on top. For me anyways, if you were to ask me what are the best examples of the pinnacles of the West versus East game design, I would actually confidently just pick Skyrim and Dark Souls respectively, and nothing from this current gen of games. Coincidentally, by the way, both of those games came out in 2011. We never knew how good we had it, did we, back then? Ever since those releases, every game from not just those studios, Bethesda or From Software, but really all studios have pretty much just replicated or tried to what those two mammoth dev studios did at that time. Although in my opinion, From Software clears Bethesda in the past 10 years and then some easily in terms of quality releases. While From Software has the Dark Souls trilogy, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Elden Ring, and even Armored Core, those all came out by the way since 2011 till right now, Bethesda in that same amount of time has made Fallout 76 and Starfield. Oh, and I guess Fallout 4. I keep forgetting that game exists, but I think we can all agree that again, if you place those games up against Skyrim or Fallout 3, you can see the DNA and the tissue connecting, but I think we can all agree that Skyrim and Fallout 3 are far better than 76 or Starfield or even Fallout 4. So why is it that the East is able to replicate and reiterate and improve, but the West just can't seem to do that as much? I think it's a lot of things, from greedy executives, of course, wanting those surefire hits and, new game devs being raised in these programmed, victimized mindsets that are bringing down the whole ship with them, so to speak, too. But if I had to pinpoint it, it's that the Eastern game devs have two things over the Western game devs in spades. One is, of course, that the East is not as nearly hell-bent on pushing ideology in all the forms, but two is that the East, while they do still lay off people, in general, the Asian side of gaming development has a far, far higher retention rate. On the flip side, the West is hell-bent on all fronts when it comes to pushing ideology, Avowed included. But also that the West kind of just treats game devs kind of like disposable toys. And whenever a game is done or not working, they don't really keep the people there or cultivate them for the future. Most of the time, the big Western game devs just kind of go, okay, we're making this game, let's hire a bunch of people. You do this, I do this, you learn whatever, years pass, the game gets done, cool, we all know how to do these things and how to work together finally, so let's now do the dumbest thing imaginable and massively fire everyone we just cultivated at our studio to shed the weight so we don't have to share the profits. And then they do it all over again for the next inevitable game, and then the growing process is just as painful a second or third or fourth time again. I mean, yeah, the East does this too, but compared to the West, come on, guys, it's not even close. So whereas the East, for the most part, cultivates their talent, this allows for a far more steady stream of content being made and games coming out at a more consistent rate. Elden Ring Night Rain, for example, that comes out this year. Armored Core wasn't that long ago either, and before that you had Elden Ring and the expansion Shadow of the Erdtree. That was last year too. In the time that From Software took to release all of those games, Bethesda pretty much just released Starfield and one bad expansion that everybody hated for it? The problem being, of course, besides ideology that does ruin everything, that the West doesn't really respect their devs as much also, and that shows. Circling back to Obsidian and Avowed, that's a big reason why their games in particular don't really push the envelope compared to what they did before. Granted, even before with New Vegas or Knights of the Old Republic 2, it was just more of the same if you compare those games to what they were pulling from. But understandably, the quality was still there. With Outer Worlds and Avowed, it's just making Obsidian honestly just look like a mini Bethesda but worse. And it does just seem like that Obsidian is just in the business of giving you Bethesda-like games that aren't as good as their past games but also offer less, and they are, for lack of a better term, Bethesda Light. That's genuinely what Obsidian has become at this point. Screen Rant continues with this very moronic take. However, in almost every instance, Obsidian Entertainment beats Bethesda at its own game, developing far more immersive, competent, and enjoyable RPGs, the likes of which Bethesda has struggled to imitate. While not every Obsidian Entertainment game is a hit, they largely excel where Bethesda can't. Avowed, Obsidian's latest game, already has the makeup of a perfect RPG, and that may be concerning for Bethesda. With practically every other studio releasing far superior RPGs, what chance does the Elder Scrolls 6 have? Well, for starters, you're just lying, Screen Rant. Obsidian is not better than Bethesda. Frankly, none of these Western game dev studios right now are particularly great, like any of them. And they're all either releasing middling, passable at best experiences, or they're just kind of making slop now. Starfield, that was a big release, but even then it didn't win any awards when it released. It was completely eclipsed by the other much better games of its time. Obsidian also doesn't make more immersive games, and Bethesda doesn't actually imitate them at all. It's actually the other way around, as I already explained. Obsidian clearly, they want to be so badly the next big Bethesda. But instead they keep making games that are just okay or passable at best. And they keep missing that real flavor or, those it factor mechanics or moments to push them over that edge into brilliance. When was the last time an Obsidian game won Game of the Year or was even considered to be in the running? Oh, that's right, that hasn't happened in 15 years, maybe more than that if ever? Plus, Skyrim is still beating Avowed on Steam despite being 14 years old. You can't be serious, Screen Rant. And saying what chance does Bethesda have with Elder Scrolls 6? Are you kidding me? Dude, the only other game that may have a bigger splash on the games industry right now besides, of course, Grand Theft Auto 6, that would be Elder Scrolls 6. If Elder Scrolls 6 got confirmed suddenly to be released this year, which isn't happening, but let's just say that it did, that would instantly become the most pre-ordered game of the year outside of Grand Theft Auto 6, and there would be hype aplenty. You can't be serious trying to claim that Obsidian has somehow taken the throne from anyone when it comes to making Western RPGs. Their games are still small fry in comparison, and at the best of times they are just usually called Skyrim but worse. Let's not kid ourselves. Look, I'm not trying to defend Bethesda here, cause they too have been faltering aplenty as well, but the sad reality is that Skyrim is still more next gen in practically every single way than like 99% of the games that are released in the West still, and that's more so sad and pathetic than it is impressive. Because it just kind of shows how regressive and unwilling the West has become in delivering games that meet the quality of something that is almost old enough to vote, for God's sakes. As much as I love The Witcher 3, we gotta be honest that Skyrim still outdoes it in terms of replay value and actual choices and systems aplenty. Witcher 3 is great, don't get it twisted, but Skyrim still has the whole thievery stealth system, entire dungeons that are littered across its map. That, by the way, not nearly enough games have taken that particular idea into account when they make their own games. You noticed how many open world Western games are mostly just, here's a big map, but a lot of them seem to lack that Skyrim dungeon design, where you just stumble upon a cave and then you end up in some crazy level where stuff starts happening? Witcher has that to some degree, yeah, but it's not nearly to the level of Skyrim. I hate to say it, fellas, but even though we're in 2025 right now, Skyrim is still pretty much the gold standard for Western RPG games. And sure, Avowed has that too, don't get me wrong, but is it to the same level as Skyrim, again, over 10 years removed? Not really. And it's baffling how so many years removed and the West has still not been able to surpass Skyrim. This might sound like I'm sucking Skyrim off, but it's more so just me telling you how pathetic the industry has been in delivering these experiences that are better than something that ran on a base Xbox 360 in 2011 compared to now. Then Screen Rant had this crazy statement which reads, Avowed could make the Elder Scrolls obsolete. It shows how out of date Bethesda's design is. Actually, if anything, Avowed's release shows how obsolete and out of date Obsidian's design is, because they still can't manage to outdo a game that they keep trying to replicate but can't ever seem to even come close to. Screen Rant then says this, Bethesda's games have declined in quality significantly since the days of Daggerfall, Morrowind, and even Oblivion. Its more recent titles, including Starfield and Fallout 76, have been marred with controversy from buggy launches to unfulfilled potential, all of which have led to fans growing upset with Bethesda. People expect more from the developer behind one of the most talked about and best-selling RPGs of all time, Skyrim. It's understandable why fans are so desperate for better Bethesda games, especially as a developer's signature flair is rarely replicated due to its complexity of its foundations. Look, Bethesda has been on the decline, sure, and yes, the past 10 years would be ample amounts of time for Obsidian to steal the crown, so to speak, from Bethesda when it comes to making blockbuster RPG games. But the reality is just that they haven't. I guarantee you, if you took every game that Obsidian made from 2011 till now, the amount of copies sold combined, they probably don't even surpass Skyrim alone. Actually, now we need to know. We all need to know, right? Okay, so Skyrim was 2011, so this means that New Vegas can't be counted here because it came out in 2011. Hey, just to interject here, this is future ENDYMION. It was 2010 that New Vegas came out, not 2011. I screwed up there, my bad, let's keep moving. Which already means that Obsidian is likely not going to cross Skyrim's numbers. So in 2011, they released Dungeon Siege 3. The best number that I could find online is that this game sold about 300,000 copies. South Park Stick of Truth, that sold 1.6 million copies, so we're now sitting roughly at 1.9 million for both of these games. Let's keep going. Pillars of Eternity, best I could find is that that game crossed about 500,000 copies by 2015 and that's it, so we're now sitting at about 2.4 million copies. Then we have Skyforge. I've never even heard of this game. It reviewed very poorly. It was co-developed between Obsidian and Avowed's team. I couldn't find any concrete numbers, but it is also a free-to-play MMO that apparently got sold off for a lot of money to like China. So unfortunately here, because it's free to play, it's hard to find actual paid customers or sales numbers. Then we have Pathfinder Adventures. According to Steam, it says it has about 200,000 owners, so that puts it at about 2.6 million sales so far. Armored Warfare has abysmal player numbers and was also co-developed by Obsidian. Again, no lifetime sales provided, but Steam charts peaked was around 700 players at best, so probably not very good. Tyranny apparently sold about 562,000 copies last recorded, so we're at about 3.1 million units so far across tons of games already. Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire was last reported sales-wise in November 2018, having only sold 110,000 copies. And yeah, it was a massive flop, so 3.2 million units now in total for Obsidian. Then we finally have an actual hit for Obsidian, The Outer Worlds, which sold roughly 5 million units, so that pushes us up to 8.1 million units overall for Obsidian. Grounded has no sales numbers, but it has reached over 20 million players via Game Pass. So this game is a success by Microsoft's way of looking at things via Game Pass, but in terms of actual sales, the best figure I could find for paid sales is 2.6 million. So that puts Obsidian at 10.7 million units so far. Then we have Penitent, which is sitting at around 270,000 units. So we're at almost 11 million units in total, and then it's Avowed. But the closest that I could find on Game Analytic is that Avowed has sold somewhere around 172,000 paid copies. So in all right now, Obsidian with actual paid copies is, let's say, sitting at 10.9, almost 11 million units across all of those games that I just went through. And what has Skyrim sold by just itself? It's sitting at around the 60 million copies mark. So Bethesda's Skyrim has sold about 6 times the entirety of Obsidian's actual paid copies sold of games they made across 10 titles from 2011 till now. So based on this, you tell me what fans are more eager about. Everything that Obsidian has made so far, which I'm not saying are bad games, but if we want to just look at the raw numbers here and then compare it to just Skyrim alone, it's not even close. Starfield has apparently sold about 3 million copies since launch, but it's also on Game Pass, which definitely hurt its sales numbers. It's also not on PlayStation yet as of this video recording, so that number could jump by then. And then Fallout 76. What do you guys think about that one? How many copies do you think that sold? 3 million, maybe 2 million, 1 million at best? The actual number of sold units for Fallout 76 so far is 21 million, if you can believe it. Yeah, that surprised me too, but that means that Fallout 76 has outsold the entire last 10 years of Obsidian games by almost double here by itself. So why am I telling you all of this? It's to say that while Obsidian may make some quality games here or there, the reality is that they are not the next Bethesda. They're quite literally, as Avowed and their other games get referenced to, they're Bethesda light at best. Screen Rant then copes really hard with this next part, and man, my god, just look at this. However, until now, no developer has offered a true competitor to Bethesda's style of game design. CD Projekt Red's third-person narrative-heavy Witcher 3, while undeniably better than Bethesda's recent output, is a vastly different experience to Skyrim or Fallout. Similarly, even Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, while veering into Scrolls-like territory, doesn't quite fit the bill due to its greater focus on realism and life sim mechanics. So it was up to Obsidian Entertainment to once again replicate Bethesda's style and prove once and for all that it is outdated. Hate to break it to Obsidian fans, but they are also outdated by their own design and hands completely of their own making. They're releasing games in 2025 that run worse and have less features than games that released in the early 2000s. They've been given every single opportunity and then some to steal the RPG throne from Bethesda. At this point, Bethesda is sitting in a small room and they're just like sleeping in a chair pretty much. And Obsidian is standing outside of that room with a loaded machine gun with like 12,000 rounds in the clip. And somehow, despite it being the easiest kill possible, Obsidian has pulled that trigger, lost control, and somehow tripped and shot themselves to death while Bethesda is just laying there unharmed. Bethesda has continuously won the comparisons and performance against Obsidian by quite literally doing nothing at all in return. Forbes reported on Avowed, and the general consensus is that Microsoft is happy with Avowed and how it's performed, and Forbes does make mention that perhaps Microsoft just wants these shorter made games simply because for Game Pass it just helps boost their service. But ultimately, I think if we're looking at the core fundamentals of what makes an okay game versus a generational one, Obsidian has yet to make one outside of maybe New Vegas, but that game was made when Chris Avellone, one of the co-founders, still worked there. Now Obsidian is simply a content mill machine, making good to okay games for the purpose to be slapped onto Game Pass, to just keep subscribers happy so that their cycles renew. Maybe that's enough for Microsoft, but I don't personally think you should be looking at Obsidian to ever take the crown from Bethesda anytime soon. Could they one day? Maybe. But I think as long as Obsidian is tied into the mantra that the games they're making are not necessarily for mass sale, but more so for a subscription service first, that the safe by-the-numbers game design and shorter games push is what they will keep doing. But as Jay Viper on Twitter pointed out, even if the game is on Game Pass, if people want to buy it, they will buy it, as he showed here with various Game Pass games that did perform well on Steam at least. Starfield hit 300,000 plus on Steam alone, Darktide broke 100,000 despite Game Pass on Steam, and Stalker 2 also broke 100,000 as well. And then you have Sea of Thieves, years removed from release, is still pulling in impressive numbers on Steam as well, and the game is also currently on the bestsellers list on Steam too. It's actually also within the same zone as Avowed too, as you can see here on screen. The point is that if the game is good, people will buy it and play it regardless, and if you ask me, history probably won't be kind to Avowed. And I think that Obsidian has to pivot and actually deliver more next-gen games instead of giving us something that looks like a worse version of a game that they have been chasing for literally over a decade now and can't surpass no matter how many times they try to. I guess the point of this video is that Obsidian can't break their curse they have been placed with, and Bethesda and Skyrim specifically are still, unfortunately, the kings of Western RPGs. It's just kind of pathetic that in the end, that no matter how much time passes, or how good the graphics can become, or these world size are, that Skyrim is still likely going to be better than 99% of the games that come out every year anyways. And that may be more so the perfect example of how Western game design has genuinely not evolved nearly enough, as it should have in the past decade and then some. Bring back dungeons in video games aplenty, bring back physics to these games worlds, and for the love of God, hire better writers that don't think there's a billion genders, guys. But what do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.